Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 24th of March. I'm Maeve McMahon and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has touched down in Australia to revive long-running trade talks after a lengthy hiatus. We'll explain why this deal matters to you. And Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has lost a high-stakes referendum on justice reform. We'll speak to our correspondent in Rome. But first, it is day 25 of the US-Israeli war on Iran. In an announcement that thrilled financial markets, US President Donald Trump said that Iran and the US, quote, want to make a deal. And he's pushed his deadline to the end of the week. However, Tehran says claims of these talks are, quote, fake news. This comes as the EU sends millions in aid to Lebanon as clashes continue between Israel and Hezbollah in the south of the country. For the latest, we're joined here in the studio by Euronews' Stefan Kobe. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Maeve.
So what's going on? I mean, this seems like quite a surprise, was what President Trump has said.
Well, surprise is quite an understatement. It was a stunner for all of us professional Trump watchers. So just hours before his own deadline for Iran, he backed down from his threat of potentially devastating airstrikes against Iranian oil installations. And remember, Maeve, on Saturday, he told Iran, if you don't unblock the Strait of Hormuz, I will answer with devastating airstrikes. I will obliterate Iranian oil installations. Then these 48 hours expired yesterday, and instead of bombs, Trump offered an olive branch, saying that he would postpone this deadline by 5 days. And that was the stunner. He was in talks with the Iranian leadership over the end of the conflict. Here's Donald Trump yesterday speaking in Memphis, Tennessee. Take a listen.
So we are now having really good discussions. They started last night, a little bit, the night before that. And I think they're very good. They want peace. They've agreed they will not have a nuclear weapon, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, et cetera, et cetera. This is all very vague, and we don't know anything about contents or even who is talking to whom here. There's only one problem with this, otherwise it would sound too good to be true. The Iranians have denied that there were talks at all. And Trump has said, we're talking since Saturday. They said, no, there were no talks. So what do we make out of this? Now, we know there were at least some contacts through intermediaries, countries like Turkey, Egypt, Oman, and Pakistan, and even the British government, Keir Starmer, yesterday, confirming these talks. He said, we were aware of these talks. But other than that, we know nothing.
So very much wait-and-see mode, Stefan Kobe. Thank you so much for that update. Now, several strong explosions and air alert sirens rang out yesterday in Bahrain. That's the first to be heard in the Gulf since the US president said, in fact, that talks to end the war with Iran were underway. For more on the feeling across the region there now, we can cross now to our regional correspondent, Adil Khalim, who's in Doha for us this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Just tell us, what is the mood like there? And does anyone trust this new deadline of President Donald Trump?
Maeve, here in Doha and across the Gulf, people are holding their collective breath this morning. And that's because the 48-hour ultimatum issued by U.S. President Donald Trump to potentially strike Iran's power infrastructure has come and gone. And for now, the worst-case scenario seems to be avoided. And honestly, there's quite a bit of relief being felt here. People know just how potentially catastrophic this could have been with repercussions in Iran and felt here in the Gulf. Still, our Euronews colleagues in Dubai heard jets being flown overhead all night. Power lines were hit in Kuwait. Shelter-in-place sirens were sounded in Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia's defense ministry says it intercepted 19 drones overnight. Also, Iranian media reported strikes on 2 energy facilities after the pause was called. So while people are cautiously optimistic, there's clearly deep uncertainty about what comes next. Here in the Gulf, everything is so closely tied to energy and water. So when there's talk of hitting Iran's power infrastructure and Tehran's possible retaliation, people here start to think about real-life consequences, about electricity, desalination, and just daily life. So while there are 2 very different stories coming out of Tehran and Washington this morning, behind the scenes, there are signs towards diplomacy. Countries like Turkey and Egypt are believed to be quietly passing messages back and forth. So right now, Maeve, the mood is cautious. Relief? Absolutely. But still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. People here aren't just assuming that things are over, just thankful that it hasn't gotten worse yet.
OK, Adil Halim, thank you so much for that live update there from Doha. Now, during their EU summit last week right here in Brussels, European leaders were clear that this was not their war. In a statement, they called for, quote, de-escalation, maximum restraint, the protection of civilians and full respect of international law by all parties. Euronews' EU editor Maria Tadeo had the chance to get the view from Israel on this by speaking to the former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. She asked him how he qualified this reaction from European leaders.
You know, it's a bit cowardly. We are fighting their war. I'll tell you why. Iran shot 2 missiles to Diego Garcia, which is almost 4,000 kilometers from Iran. That's a range that reaches Brussels, that reaches Madrid, that reaches Paris. And we, in fact, had we not acted, all of Europe would be under a terrible nuclear ballistic missile menace. So we're fighting your war, and we expect not to be, criticized in and on, but we expect your backing. That would be the decent thing to do. But we get it. We have to do the hard job. We're used to it, and we'll do what's right.
But let me pick up on that point. So at this point, you'd say the reaction from the Europeans is that they are cowards.
Many, not everyone. Some European countries have stepped up to the plate, but many others.
Like who?
I'm not going to name names. I think you know exactly who. I think any European leader who sort of says, this isn't our problem. So when will it become your problem? When they have a nuclear weapon? When the missile is on its way to Madrid? When it hits Madrid or Barcelona? Is that when you're going to wake up? So we're doing the fighting. We didn't ask you for any help, nothing. All we're doing is fighting against this horrible radical Islamist menace. We're reducing and hopefully eliminating this threat. And instead of thanking us, you're criticizing us. I mean, what's the deal there?
Well, since you mentioned Madrid, of course, there's other governments led by the Spanish government that say this war is entirely illegal and, by the way, has destroyed any sort of diplomacy in the Middle East. Is that fair criticism?
No, it's just foolish criticism. Spain's leadership has been just abhorrent, I have to say. Incredibly disappointing. Because here's how it works. If you allow a threat to grow and grow, at some point it becomes so big that you can't manage the threat anymore. Like North Korea, where the world did not act, and now no one can take care and eliminate those nuclear weapons. Like Hitler, who became so big and everyone wanted to avoid war until it was too late. So this time we acted on time.
But what about when a U.S. top official resigns because he says there was no imminent threat to the U.S.?
Regarding that guy who quit, well, he's a schmuck. I don't care about him. He's irrelevant. He's going to go down in the dustbin of history. We're fighting the most just war ever, and we should be getting your backing and not your criticism.
We've seen the president of the U.S. now seems to want to make a deal. He suggests it's 5 days still of talks, and he says the Iranians wants to make a deal. The U.S. also wants to make a deal. What about Israel? Is a deal a good thing for Israel at this point?
It depends. We have objectives. Our objective is to totally dismantle the nuclear program and ensure they never achieve a nuclear weapon. Same with the ballistic missiles, and same with dismantling the terror proxies. So we have to see what the deal is. If it achieves those goals, that's wonderful.
Okay, and this is my final question, however, and it is the question at this point. What happens if the U.S. decides this war is over for us? We leave now. Goals have been met, but Israel considers no. Those 3 key goals have not been met. Will you go on fighting alone without the support of the U.S.?
We're going to have to take a look at the actual results if this indeed turns into a full-blown agreement, and then we'll make our decisions.
Based on those points, and what are those points? Are you working in tandem with the U.S.? That is really the question, because it seems from the outside, Israel believes this is not going to get done in a week. The U.S. is now talking about a 5-day until Friday. That's a big gap in the timeline.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Our objectives are to dismantle the nuclear and ballistic programs, dismantle the global terror proxy network.
Maria today they're speaking to Naftali Bennett, the former ultra-nationalist Prime Minister of Israel and businessman. You can catch the full interview on Euronews.com. But now moving on, the EU Commission President is down under this week. She's just clinched a trade deal with Australia amid conflict and instability in the Middle East and trade tensions with the US and China. Jakob Yanis reports.
It's an over 20-hour flight to Sydney, but the price at the end might just be worth it. European Commission President is in Australia right now, trying to push a long-delayed free trade deal across the finish line. With US tariffs rising and trade tensions heating up with China, both Brussels and Canberra urgently need reliable partners.
Because trade is not just economics, it is power.
And that's quite interesting, so let's take a look. The economic ties are already massive. The EU is currently Australia's third largest trading partner, exporting almost 28 billion euros more in goods than in imports. And for the EU, Australia ranks just 20th. But this deal is not about selling more machinery. It is about securing the green transition, a goal that the current war in Iran has turned into a matter of sheer energy security. Australia is the world's third largest producer of rare earths, and Brussels wants to remove trade barriers to critical raw materials like lithium and cobalt to limit its reliance on China. But the big sticking point is agriculture. Fearing a repeat of the Mercosur farmer protests, Brussels is putting a hard ceiling on Australian meat imports, demanding strict quotas and full protection for European food names. But hey, there's also a bigger picture. Brussels is on a roll, sealing recent pacts with Mercosur, India, Mexico, Switzerland and Indonesia to become the ultimate reliable partner. And according to von der Leyen, the message is clear.
The world wants to trade with Europe.
And if you're thinking that there is somebody missing in this beautiful picture, it is the United States, which happens to be the EU's biggest trading partner. For now, European lawmakers are trying to implement a limited trade deal. But between Donald Trump's 15% tariffs and recent US Supreme Court chaos, progress is slow. And one would say that the biggest obstacle to an EU-US trade deal seems to be the US itself.
Jakob Yanis there. And in fact, this Thursday, the European Parliament will be voting on that EU-US trade deal that would impose 15% tariffs on EU goods. The EU also agreed to buy almost €650 billion of US energy exports until 2028. To get the view now from the Trump administration, we're joined here in the studio by the US Ambassador to the European Union, Andrew Puzder. Lovely to have you back with us.
Great to be here, Maeve. Thanks for having me.
So all eyes on this vote finally taking place this Thursday. Will it pass, do you think?
All the signs seem to be good. You hate to take anything for granted, and I don't want to prejudge the result. We're going to keep working with people to make sure we address any issues that they have. But I say the signs are good, and it really would be economic malpractice not to pass this. It's a great deal for the United States and a great deal for the European Union. So hopefully we'll see it passed.
We'll keep a close eye on it. You heard in that report that some think that the US is the biggest obstacle to doing trade with the European Union. How would you react to that argument?
Well, I'd say, we signed this agreement we signed it in August, late August of this year. And every day since then, the United States has been in compliance with what it agreed to do under the agreement. We have yet to have a day where the Europeans are in compliance because they had a process to go through. I guess the second to the last step will be, or maybe the third to the last step is Parliament approves, and they go to trilogue, and then they vote again. But we're anxious to see it approved, but I don't think the United States is the obstacle. Like I say, we've been complying. We're waiting for Europe to get through its process.
Well, there's anxiety, of course, among European lawmakers. There's anxiety among European business due to the fact that every second week we hear different announcements from the White House when it comes to potential tariffs that would hurt our economy here in Europe.
So, as I said, despite what you're hearing, despite the political talk, the United States has been in compliance every day. There's not one day where we haven't been in compliance under the agreement, and we're waiting for Europe to be in compliance like one day. So, I don't think this is a one-sided issue. We're ready to go.
And can the Europeans trust you?
Of course they can. They've trusted us for 250 years, I think. At least many of them have.
And what happens if this is signed, but then in a couple of weeks, Trump gets angry with Spain, for example, due to their stance on certain geopolitical issues and decides to cut off trade with them?
Well, if you're saying what happens if somebody breaches the agreement, then I think the parties have to analyze
where they are. I don't know that particularly would be a breach. We'd have to wait and see how the agreement comes out. We're still waiting to go through amendments that the Parliament's proposed and whether the Council will accept those amendments, and there'll be a different bill out of the trilogue. And so we're waiting to see what the final bill says. But it's like any other agreement. If one party breaches, the other party reacts.
And of course, the big news that we're reporting on this morning is Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Australia clinching a brand new trade deal for the Europeans with Australia. What's the view from the White House on this?
Look, if two of our closest allies come to an agreement on trade, I think that helps the world. It doesn't hurt the world. We just want to make sure we get our deal done.
Of course, you're not jealous of the other friendships that the European Union has across the world.
We have other agreements as well. We have agreements with South Korea, with Japan. We're moving forward on a number of different tracks. I don't think we could lecture somebody else about doing the same.
And is that a warning shot to Brussels to get that vote across?
I don't make warning shots. I'm just hopeful that they'll get it across. I think it's in their best interest. I think it's in our best interest of the people of Europe and the people of America. So let's get it done. Let's move on. Let's really build the kind of economic relationship and the kind of joint prosperity that we could and should share.
OK, we'll keep a close eye on it. Ambassador Andrew Puzder, thank you so much for coming into us here. Now we turn to Italy, where a 2-day referendum on judicial reform has concluded. The proposed changes triggered deep political divisions across the country and united the centre-left opposition. The government argued that splitting the career paths of judges and prosecutors was essential to strengthening judicial independence, but critics say it could upset the balance of powers established after the fall of fascism. For more, we can head now to Rome and bring in our correspondent, Georgia Orlandi. Good morning. So the referendum has actually failed. What more can you tell us?
Good morning, Maeve. Well, indeed, it looks like the majority of Italians rejected that key judicial reform. This was one of Meloni's main political pledges. The most controversial element of the reform was the proposal to change the way members of this body overseeing judges' careers are selected. So under the proposal, they would have been selected by lottery, move that the critics say undermines merit. And as you mentioned there, undermines the balance of powers, despite the fact that this reform was promoted as a way to limit political influence. Now, 50 million Italians were called to say yes or no to the reform. The no camp won just by a few points. That's not a landslide, but that's enough to block the reform, also considering that no turnout threshold was required. The most interesting aspect of the referendum was the fact that we saw a very high voter turnout, almost 60%, higher than expected, level seen in 2022 during the general elections that brought Meloni to power, something that makes us think that this was seen as a political test for Meloni and her government. Maeve?
Well, this is it. It feels a little bit like a big test for Giorgia Meloni's government. Did she fail it then?
Well, indeed, Maeve, she had already ruled out resigning over the result. She wanted to avoid the path taken by former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who resigned after losing that constitutional referendum in 2016. Reacting to the outcome, she said that, of course, she respects the decisions taken by Italian voters, but that she also says she's determined to continue, now hinting to the fact that she doesn't see this as a major political defeat. But it's clear, as analysts say, that this outcome has made her more vulnerable. So the next few months will be challenging, given that the next general elections will take place in 2027. The referendum took place at a challenging time. Meloni has faced criticism over her handling of the war in the Middle East, especially when it comes to this very close relationship with Donald Trump that critics say, quote, it's very risky for Italy. The main takeaway from this outcome, though, Maeve, is the fact that Meloni will have to review its reform plan and, most importantly, try to strengthen the ruling coalition, unity within that coalition ahead of what looks like a very uncertain political phase. Maeve?
OK, Georgia Orlandi, thank you so much for that live update there from Rome. And thank you so much for watching Europe Today. For more on any other stories breaking across Europe today, including the general elections taking place in Denmark, you can always visit Euronews.com. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Take care and see you very soon here on Euronews.